Hey, I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater, and today I have a new interface from MOTU that offers incredible flexibility, along with, of course, outstanding sound quality. Let's get started. Today we are looking at the new 16A from MOTU. Now, there was a 16A interface in the past, but this is a ground-up redesign based on MOTU's 30 years of experience with audio hardware and software, and I have to tell you, it's fantastic. Not only does it sound great, it feels and looks wonderful, and it's super flexible, as we'll see. What we have here is a next-gen Thunderbolt 4 or USB4 audio interface. According to MOTU, the first true Thunderbolt 4 compatible audio interface on the market. So what's the big deal about Thunderbolt 4? First of all, it's compatible with USB4, so that makes it nice for just interconnecting things. It also has extremely high bandwidth, up to 40 gigabits per second. The device will automatically negotiate the bandwidth when it connects up and looks at what's connected. There's a second Thunderbolt 4 port on the back panel of the 16A, and you can add up to 6 more devices there. Those can be storage devices, they could be monitors, whatever you want. In addition to Mac and Windows support, and the 16A is class compliant for Macintosh, and it does have dedicated drivers for both Mac and PC that are going to give you your best results. But in addition to that, it also supports direct connection to iOS devices, whether with a USB-C port or with a Lightning to USB-C adapter. So you can use this audio interface in a variety of different scenarios. Just as there are 2 USB4 Thunderbolt 4 ports on the back panel, there also are 2 Ethernet style ports for AVB, but also for connecting to a router. And you can control this as a standalone mixer using CueMix Pro app running on a mobile device. So we've talked a lot about some of that networking and control capability, but let's talk more about the 16A itself. This is a 32 in and 34 output audio interface. It offers 16 analog inputs. Now, there aren't any mic preamps in this. These are line level inputs. They can be balanced or unbalanced on 1/4 inch on the back panel. Likewise, we have 16 1/4 inch TRS balanced or unbalanced outputs on the back panel. We also have 2 banks of ADAT optical. As we'll see, those can be either 8-channel optical on both those banks, or one can be set for SPDIF input or SPDIF output, and then the other set for 8 channels of ADAT output. So you have a lot of expansion capabilities, and as we'll see, it's very easy to connect an external device by light pipe or optical and take advantage of that I/O on the back panel. Rounding things out, we have a headphone output on the front panel, and that can have its own individual source, and of course it also has its own independent volume control. The specs for the 16A are simply outstanding. We have 120 dB of dynamic range on the inputs, 125 dB on the outputs using ESS Sabre technology, so outstanding dynamic range on those outputs. We've got vanishingly low THD plus noise, distortion extremely low, and so on, so the specs are just world class on this 16A, and it really does sound fantastic. Additional hardware features include 20 dB of additional gain on the inputs, and you can set that in 1 dB increments, and we also have control over 99 dB of attenuation on the outputs as well, so you have total control over your signal levels. And speaking of the outputs, they're DC coupled, so they're ideal for working with voltage controlled synthesizers or Eurorack modules. And the outputs can also be set up for control room features. You could connect 3 sets of monitors here, and you can build monitor groups. So those could be anywhere from a stereo output to up to all 16 channels being controlled from a single volume control on the front panel for immersive setups. Rounding out the I/O complement, we have word clock in and out through ports on the back panel for synchronizing the 16A to the rest of your digital gear in your studio. So let's take a quick tour of the front panel. Beginning on my far left, we have the headphone section. We've got the headphone jack, of course. We've got a volume control. And everything that's associated with the headphone will be read out here in this section of the TFT display. So if we change the volume, we can see that changing. We've also got stereo meters for the headphone. We can choose our source here among the different types. So we can either mirror what's coming out of the monitors or set up a completely independent headphone mix if we like. And we can mono our headphones using this switch here. Continuing on to the center of the unit, we have 2 3.9-inch TFT displays. They're beautiful displays, 24-bit, and they show us, as we'll see, both the channels, what's happening on inputs and outputs, our headphones over here, and also some other information, our master monitor output, and connectivity and locking and so on over here on the right, as we'll see. Jumping to the far right, we have the power switch, we have the monitor volume control, and again, you can see that here on the front panel. And we also have access to the menu from here. We can either hit select or just turn the menu control, and as we turn that, we'll scroll through the different sections that give us access to what we need here. And if we hit select, Now we jump over and we can choose among those. Now an interesting feature that we're looking at here is the meters can be set to display either the analog I/O only, the digital I/O only, or all meters. And you choose what you want here, hit select, and you're good. Let's go back to analog for now. On that, when we hit back, we'll jump back to the previous display. Now at the bottom here, we can see that we're connected to our host. If we were on an AVB network, these two displays would indicate that. We also can see our sample rate and where our clock is coming from. In this case, it's internal to the 16A. So we can do a lot right from the front panel of the 16A, but things really get interesting when we jump over to the CueMix Pro app running on the computer. Let's take a look at that now. So the opening screen for the CueMix Pro app is called Discovery. This is where you can install the driver if you need to. You can select among your devices, disconnect devices, and so on. The home page gives us some of our monitor settings. So here you can see my monitor group is line out 1 and line out 2. So when I change the front panel volume control, I'm adjusting the level that's coming out of those two monitor outputs. Now we can add additional monitors to that group. In fact, we could add all 16 outputs here and have a massive immersive system that are all controlled by that single volume control. But in addition to that, we can also set this up with multiple stereo pairs, as we'll see. Hang on for 1 second and we'll get to that. Over here we have duplication basically of the headphones on the front panel. So we've got our level meters, we've got our volume control. It reflects what's happening here, or we can move that with the mouse. We can choose our source and so on. Again, this is where we set up our monitor group, and we can connect a microphone and a preamp directly into one of the inputs and designate that to be our talkback microphone to our musicians. You address that by clicking the talk button, and that can either latch or be momentary. You can also choose the source, so wherever you have your preamp plugged in is where that will show up, and we have a level control, a dim control, and so on. And you can route the destination for that among all the aux sends, so whatever you're using to feed your headphones is where you can route that talkback. If we move to the device tab, this is where we'll see some more of the setup sort of features. So here's where we can set our sample rate up to 192K. We can set our clock source. We're set to internal. We can also set our clock output or through, depending on how we have our clocking set up in our studio. And then we can access our AVB streams here. So if we're using this in an AVB network, you have access to all of that right here as well for setting up the streams. Note here that there's a little pencil icon. If we click that, we can actually name our 16A. So if you have more than one 16A, you can name them independently, or if you just want to change the name of the unit as it appears, you can do that right here. Now if we go to the Inputs tab, we'll see our 16 inputs, and here's where you can see that trim up to 20 dB of gain. There's also polarity invert for each of those inputs. Now I mentioned on the optical input that one bank of those can be either SPDIF or 8-channel optical. In this case, both banks, here's bank A and here's bank B, are set to 8-channel optical or ADAT optical. If we switch this to TOS or SPDIF, which is optical SPDIF, then bank A changes the input to that format while we still have 8 channels over here on bank B. Now you can do this independently on the input and the output. So we could be sending 8 channels out of both banks while receiving stereo SPDIF or TOS on bank A and 8 channels. So it's very versatile from that standpoint as well. Let's drop that back over to 8 channels. We have a similar page for our outputs. So here's again where we can set up our monitor group here. But an additional feature is this ABC on feature. When we turn that on, now outputs 1 and 2 become monitor out A, outputs 3 and 4 become monitor out B, and outputs 5 and 6 become monitor out C. So this allows you to set up 3 different sets of monitors and instantly switch among them, or route to all 3 at once. And this is useful if you're setting up, say, a subwoofer or something like that. Again, we have our headphone duplicated here. We've got our outputs with that trim that goes all the way down to actually minus infinity, but 99 dB down. M actually designates whether it's part of the monitor group. So you can see that 1 and 2 have the M illuminated. That means that they're part of the monitor group up here. If we add more, you'll see that they're added into the monitor group as well. At the bottom, this is our optical output banks. Again, we can set bank A to be stereo TOS if we like. Now I'm going to skip over the Patchbay tab for just 1 second. We'll come back to that. But the mixing tab takes us to a very powerful mixer that runs on DSP inside the 16A. Now, this is a near zero latency mixer that's built right in and uses DSP on the machine itself, along with processing and effects, as we'll see, that doesn't affect anything that's happening inside your computer. So there's no load on your computer when you're using this. This is a 64 input mixer with 30 buses and tons more, as we'll see. Now on the mixer page, we can access any of the mixers mixes for any of the aux sends, for the master outputs. We can create separate monitor and headphone mixes. There's a reverb built in that we can access, as we'll see, and so on. And you control all of that with the mix settings here. You can show or hide that, but this gives us access to what we're seeing in this mixer here. So first of all, we can show hide different channels as we like. We can also show and hide different buses. It's not going to do anything here because they're scrolled off to the right. We can show the different sections of each channel strip. Now, we can name each channel strip, so we can click there and just input whatever name we want. And then we can turn settings on and off. Now, settings allows us to set the source for each channel or each input. And we can set those up to be either stereo or mono. Now, this is set to host out 1, which is the signal coming from Pro Tools. And I've got it in stereo, so it's linked up with channel 2 as well. So that's why we're seeing a host out 1 and 2 here. Now, there are 128 returns from your DAW software that can come into this mixer. So very powerful for selecting your source. One other thing we have here in this page for setting the input on each of the channels in our mixer is a high-pass filter. So we can filter out rumble and so on. So we've got 21 hertz here, it goes all the way up to 20K actually if you need to basically let everything through. So we can turn that off there. And then to exit this, we click here. Now we can also show and hide the EQ. We get into the EQ by just clicking here. It's a 4-band double precision EQ, lows, low mid, and highs, and we have 3 different shapes here for each that can be a bell or 2 different shelves as well. And you can set that by simply moving here, or we can click and enter a specific frequency if we like. We can also engage and disengage each band independently. When you've got the EQ set the way that you want, bring that back down here, exit out of here, and now we can access our dynamic section. Again, we can show and hide that. But this consists of a gate as well as a compressor. You can engage those independently. Here's our compressor. Here's our gate back on again. They have separate controls for each of those. So you can set up gating and compression independently on each of those inputs. Turn those back off, exit back out. And now we have our sends, and we can show and hide our sends. When you have a send on a channel, you'll see it show up here. And the orange lines indicate which sends you actually have turned up. When we click on that, we'll see all the sends for that particular channel. So if we raise some of these up and we exit out, you'll see that those are now turned up on that particular channel. So you have access to all the sends, whether they're straight aux sends, whether they're mono, whether they're stereo, or the reverb send from right here. Close that back out. We can show and hide the pan control if we're on mono channels. We can hide the mute. We can hide the fader if you don't need the fader for some reason, and we can also hide the solo button. So that's very useful for fitting the mixer display to your screen. One more feature here, we have this auto button. When we click that, the software will basically choose what you're seeing here to fit the application. We'll hide that, and now we can look at our aux buses. Here's where we configure our aux buses. So you can see that this is set up to be pre-fader. We can also make it post-fader. We can make them stereo or mono. You can see it splits to aux 1 and aux 2 when we do that. Some of these are stereo, some of those are mono. Our last one is reverb. That's always going to be a stereo send, but we can configure that for either pre or post. Now our next tab here is very important. This is the on faders tab, and this selects which of our main out, our reverb send, or our aux sends is going to be displayed here in our mixer. So right now we're looking at the main mix, which will go out of our main outputs. We could also look at aux 1 and 2, wherever we might be choosing to send that, aux 9 and 10, aux 15, and so on, all the way down to our reverb send here. Now we have a locked channel strip over here, and that's going to display the master for whatever of your buses that you're viewing here in your on faders. So if it's master, you'll see the master fader. If it's an aux, you'll see the aux. You see the label change up here. And by the way, of course, you can rename that if you like, and then all the way down to reverb. Now, when we do select the reverb, it's going to lock over here, and then you can open up the reverb controls. So we can see a graphic display of the reverb tail, our pre-delay. We can set the size. We can set our different parameters, pre-delay, damping, decay, width, and so on, or also jump immediately back to the defaults if we like. Close that out, we come back to our on faders display, and finally we have our talkback section where again, we can instantly turn that on and off. Now let's look here at our aux mixing. Basically what this does is give us a larger view of the mixes we're creating on each of those aux buses, whether they're stereo, whether they're mono, reverb, and so on. So it's just another way to view those and instantly see what's happening with them. Now let's jump to a very powerful feature of the 16A, and that's the built-in Patchbay. So the way this is set up is we have sources. There are 4 different sources for signals in the mixer and in the Patchbay. There's the device itself, so these are actually the line level inputs, and you'll notice that we can name those if we like. And then we can route those using patch cables to destinations. They might be the hardware outputs. They might be the mixer channels, mixer input channels, might be network over AVB, or it might be your host software. So let's look a little bit closer here. The way this works, we simply take a cable and pull it over and connect it, and we're instantly patched in there. Now let's go ahead and take that one off there. We can also drag down, select more than one, so any number, and route them wherever we like. So let's go ahead and undo that. Or we can grab everything at once and move it over. But the cool thing is that any of the input sources can have multiple outputs. So we could take line in 1 and route it to multiple places. So we can create massive mults, if we like, for splitting our signal and routing it wherever we want. Let's go ahead and take those back out of there. So our sources include the device, which is the line inputs coming in the back panel of the 16A itself. We can also take the outputs from the mixer can be a source. So our main mix, you can see I've got my main mix going to outputs 3 and 4, and that's actually what's feeding our camera today. My monitor mix, if we look at that, is actually multed. It is feeding our monitors, but I've also got it routed down here to feed my headphones. So I'm getting both of those simultaneously. Both my monitors and my headphones are getting the same feed. Now each of our aux mixes can also be routed to particular destinations. In my case, I've got aux 1 and aux 2 set up, routed into line out 5 and 6. And line out 5 and 6 are feeding into this Elysia X-Max, which is a master bus processor. Allows you to do 3-band processing of your master signal. And then I'm bringing that back into 2 of the inputs on the 16A. So I can instantly switch whatever sources I want to send into that X-Max right here inside this software. It's so cool and so easy. Now I've also got an Audient ASP800, which is an 8-channel preamp. That's hooked up by light pipe, so I can access any of those as my device inputs. If I click back over here, go down to my optical inputs, I can simply choose those and route them wherever I want them to go. It's so cool. The last piece of gear I have hooked up in my system today is a Neve 1073 SPX, which is a channel strip with EQ preamp. That's routing into one of my inputs as well. And so I've got a great channel strip to feed microphone signals straight into the 16A. And again, I can patch that however I like using my Patchbay here. We can also route AVB streams from any source to any destination as well. So we could be feeding an AVB stream to one of the main outputs. We could be routing it to an output that's feeding a compressor or another piece of gear, whatever it might be. And finally, our host outputs can also serve as sources that we can feed into line outputs that we could send to the mixer, to the network, and so on. And again, as we scroll down here, you'll see that there are 128 of those. Now I've got some of those patched here. Basically, those are coming back in so that they're set up to create a mix inside the mixer for monitoring when you're tracking or recording. We have a similar setup over here on destinations. So device gives us our hardware inputs on the back panel of the 16A. Mixer gives us our input channels on the mixer. And again, down here, I've got my host signals coming into these mixer channels so I can easily create a monitor mix for tracking and overdubbing. We can have inputs to our network devices with AVB streams. And finally, we've got our host computer inputs. And you can see that I've got the various inputs here, all the line inputs. We've also got all the optical inputs that are feeding into my host inputs. And we've got up to 128 of those as well. So this gives you so much versatility, and this can operate standalone. So we can hook this up to a Wi-Fi network and then use the CueMix Pro app running on your mobile device, whether a phone or a tablet, and you can control this remotely for patching, for controlling the mixer, any of the routing, any of the effects, the EQ, all those kind of things. That allows the 16A to serve both as an audio interface that's fantastic in your studio, as a great network device. It also works great as a standalone mixer for live sound applications. It can serve as a separate expander So you could run just the optical outputs and inputs of this into your existing audio interface and get 16 more analog in and 16 more analog outs using this as basically an I/O expander for your existing interface. It's so versatile, and because of that patch bay, you can just leave all your gear connected and instantly switch to whatever you want to use. I'm sure one of the main questions about all this is, what does this mean as far as latency goes? Because of that onboard DSP and because of the design of the 16A, MOTU has stated that this is about 1.8 milliseconds of latency. So if you're mixing, certainly no issue at all. But that latency is perfectly acceptable for all kinds of tracking applications as well. A couple of other things. Of course, the 16A is perfectly set up for looping back if you're doing streaming or podcasting. With that patch bay and the mixer and everything that this interface can do, it's ideal for so many different situations. Now, of course, it comes with a software bundle to get you started right out of the gate. It comes with Performer Lite, which is going to give you DAW software, and that includes more than 100 instruments as well, virtual instruments as well, 6 gigabytes of loops and samples. So you're really ready to go right out of the gate with the 16A as soon as you connect it to your computer. I hope you've enjoyed this look at the all-new 16A from MOTU. Fantastic audio interface that gives you so many capabilities. This may just be the most versatile audio interface that I've encountered in looking at so many different interfaces. And best of all, it's backed up by all of MOTU's design experience and their support experience and their software experience dating back decades. And it sounds absolutely fantastic. Be sure to check it out. You can learn more at sweetwater.com, or better yet, contact your Sweetwater sales engineer because they've got all the details for you. Thanks for joining me today. I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater.